Picture this. You're handed a rule book with 613 commands, and your first thought is probably, this is going to limit my freedom. But what if I told you that God's very first commandment to humanity wasn't a restriction at all? Today, we're exploring the protective purpose of God's laws in the Torah and how the Sabbath embodies divine love. Specifically, how these ancient commandments function as safeguards for human flourishing, why they're fundamentally different from other legal systems, and how understanding this changes everything about how we view divine authority. Let me bring in someone who spent years studying this fascinating intersection of law and love.
So here's what most people miss. According to Rabbi Avraham Kovel's analysis, God's very first commandment wasn't don't eat from the tree of knowledge. It was actually, of every tree of the garden you shall surely eat. The Torah doesn't begin with limitation, but with a divine mandate to savor the richness of creation.
Wait, that completely flips the script on how we think about divine commands. So you're saying the foundation is abundance, not restriction?
Exactly, and this sets up everything that follows. The Torah makes this explicit in Leviticus when it says, "You shall keep my ordinances and my laws, and the man shall do them and live through them." The Hebrew phrase vachai bahem literally means "and live through them," indicating that commandments aren't just rules to follow, but pathways to a more fulfilled existence.
That's incredible. So we're talking about a completely different framework than what most people assume.
Right. And to understand just how revolutionary this was, we need to look at what Torah law was responding to. By the time Israel received its law at Sinai, Hammurabi's code had already become part of the cultural memory of the ancient Near East. But from a biblical perspective, that code represented a system where the strong ruled over the weak and justice served the throne of empire rather than the dignity of every person.
So there were already legal systems in place. What made Torah law different?
The forms looked similar on the surface. Both used the if-then case law style. Both addressed injury, theft, property. But the values were completely different. In Hammurabi's system, if a man destroyed the eye of a noble, his own eye was destroyed. If the victim was a commoner, he paid a fine. If a slave, the penalty was lower still. Justice preserved the established social order.
Wow, so literally different rules for different classes of people.
Exactly. But in the Torah, the law insists that every person stands equal before God. Hammurabi declared that the sun god Shamash granted him laws to secure his throne. The Torah presents law as coming from Yahweh, who rescued a nation of slaves and bound them to himself in a relationship of mutual obligation and faithfulness.
That's such a fundamental shift in purpose. Instead of protecting power, it's protecting people.
And this shows up in how Torah laws are categorized. According to recent scholarship, they're organized into mitzvot aseh, positive commandments requiring action, and mitzvot lo ta'aseh, negative commandments prohibiting certain actions. But there's also this fascinating category called mishpatim, laws that align with human reason and morality, like justice and fairness.
So some laws are obviously logical, but others might not be immediately apparent?
Right. Those are called hukim, decrees whose reasons may not be immediately apparent, like kosher laws. But here's what's fascinating. Even these serve protective functions we might not see at first glance. The Torah is designed as what Rabbi Ethan Tucker calls a blueprint for life that telegraphs the soundness of its structure.
I love that phrase. So even when we don't understand the why, there's still an underlying protective logic?
Exactly. And we see this most clearly in how Torah law prioritizes society's most vulnerable. According to Moshe Taragin's analysis, the first laws delivered after the Ten Commandments don't address sacrifices or religious ritual. They address personal moral conduct and protecting the weakest members of society.
So the priority is immediately on social justice and protection.
Right. The laws in Mishpatim repeatedly return to the treatment of slaves, with particular concern for female slaves who found themselves in an even more precarious position. The Torah spotlights treatment of orphans and widows, emphasizing their dignity and well-being.
And this brings us to something really fascinating, how the Sabbath fits into this protective framework. Because that's not just about individual rest, is it?
Oh, the Sabbath is brilliant. According to research from the University of the Free State, the Sabbath serves multiple protective functions. Genesis 2:1-3 highlights it as joyful resting, but Exodus and Deuteronomy frame it as both commandment and trust in God as provider.
Trust in God as provider, that's interesting. How does that work?
Well, think about it. In a society where your survival depends on constant work, taking a full day off requires enormous faith that you'll still have enough. The Sabbath forces people to trust that God will provide, which breaks the cycle of anxiety-driven overwork.
So it's protecting people from their own survival instincts, in a way.
Exactly. And according to Mathilde Frey's doctoral research, the Sabbath liberates people from oppressive regimes of man-made gods, places them in proper relationships with each other, and relieves their attitude toward work in a society exhausted by hard labor.
Man-made gods, that's such a powerful way to think about it. Like the god of productivity or economic anxiety.
Right. And here's where it gets really beautiful. The Sabbath also serves what Moshe Taragin calls an essential social function. Setting aside time to commemorate shared experiences forms the glue that binds families and forges communal bonds. On these days, communities retell their collective story and reaffirm their commitment to communal living.
So it's protecting community cohesion too, not just individual well-being.
Absolutely. And according to Philip Alexander's research, the Sabbath is defined both negatively by abstention from work and positively by worship. But here's what's fascinating. The work restrictions aren't arbitrary. They're based on the 39 melahot, categories of work derived from constructing the tabernacle.
So even the specific prohibitions have this deeper symbolic meaning?
Exactly. According to Shabbad's analysis, God rested from creating on the seventh day, not because he needed a break, but because he ceased from creating. By ceasing to create, God actually created the concept of rest. So when we abstain from creative work on Sabbath, we're imitating God's own pattern.
That's such a profound concept, rest as a creative act in itself.
And it gets even more beautiful. The Zohar refers to Shabbat as Yoma Dinishmasa, the day of the soul. Rabbi Dov Beshnori noted that there's literally a change in the pulse of a person on the Sabbath due to the great pleasure the soul is experiencing.
Wait, an actual physical change? That's incredible.
Right. The Sabbath creates space for what Rabbi Dov Ber called shov, to return. It's an opportunity to remove worldly concerns and return to the self. Any area where someone may have veered from their path during the week, the Sabbath is the time for realignment.
So it's like a weekly reset button for the soul.
Exactly. And this connects to something really important about how Torah laws function practically. According to Rabbi Avraham Kovel's observations from Orthodox communities, the divorce rate remains below 10% compared to 50% in the general population, and marriage satisfaction is outstanding.
Those are striking numbers. What's creating that difference?
The Torah establishes commandments that appear restrictive but actually strengthen relationships. Like the law that in the first year of marriage, the husband must dedicate himself to making his wife happy. This alignment of priorities sets the foundation for the entire relationship.
So what looks like a rule is actually protecting the relationship from competing priorities.
Right. And there are laws about physical boundaries that prevent casual intimacy that often leads to emotional confusion. Plus the laws of family purity, where couples separate physically for about 12 days monthly, focusing on emotional and intellectual connection.
That's fascinating. Forced breaks that actually strengthen the bond.
Exactly. And this gets to something crucial about how we understand divine law. According to the Jewish Virtual Library's analysis, in the Pentateuch, legal and moral norms aren't distinguished. The apodictic form is used both for don't murder and love your neighbor. They're presented with equal authority.
So there's no hierarchy between ritual law and moral law. They're all part of the same protective system.
Right. And this created what scholars call a new basis of authority for behavioral precepts. Instead of individualistic morality, Torah created national morality addressed to Israel as a corporate moral entity. The community becomes responsible for maintaining standards.
So it's not just individual protection, but collective responsibility for everyone's well-being.
Exactly. And here's something really interesting. Despite the exclusive covenantal relationship with Israel, God's enforcement of legal moral norms is pictured as universal. Cain, the generation of the flood, Sodom, all subjects of divine retribution, though they weren't parties to the covenant.
So the protective principles apply universally, even if the specific covenant is particular.
Right. And this brings us back to something profound about the Sabbath specifically. According to Jesus' interpretation in the Gospels, the Sabbath was made for humanity, not humanity for the Sabbath. He emphasized that acts of mercy and compassion were consistent with the Sabbath spirit.
So even when there seemed to be conflict between the law and human need, the principle was always to prioritize human welfare.
Exactly. Jesus argued that the Sabbath's true purpose was restoration, mercy, and worship, not mere adherence to rules. This gets to the heart of what divine law is really about.
And this connects to something Rabbi Ethan Tucker pointed out, that Torah laws are supposed to evoke admiration from outsiders. If they don't, something might be wrong with our interpretation.
That's such an important point. Deuteronomy 4:6 says that keeping the mitzvot will be your wisdom and understanding in the eyes of the nations. The laws should be obviously good and compelling, not repulsive or arbitrary.
So there's this built-in check. If the laws aren't producing human flourishing that others can recognize, we need to re-examine our understanding.
Exactly. And this is why Rabbi Hirsch said that through mitzvah observance, we achieve nothing more and nothing less than life in its most positive form. The purpose is to make life amazing, not to restrict it.
That's beautiful. So when you step back from all this, what we're really seeing is a complete reframing of what divine authority looks like.
Right. Instead of arbitrary power exercised for its own sake, we see protective love expressed through practical wisdom. The laws function like guardrails on a mountain road. They're not there to limit your journey, but to keep you safe so you can reach your destination.
And the Sabbath becomes this perfect embodiment of that principle. What looks like restriction is actually the deepest form of care.
Exactly. It protects us from our own tendency toward endless striving, creates space for relationships and reflection, and reminds us weekly that our worth isn't tied to our productivity. It's divine love made practical.
So the next time someone sees religious law as oppressive, they're missing this entire protective framework that's designed for human flourishing.
Right. And understanding this changes how we approach not just religious practice, but how we think about authority, community responsibility, and what it means to create systems that truly serve human well-being.
That's a profound shift. Instead of seeing divine law as limitation, we can recognize it as the ultimate expression of protective love. Laws designed not to control us, but to help us flourish. Remember that first commandment we talked about? Of every tree you shall surely eat? That abundance mindset is woven throughout this entire system. Thanks for joining us on Co-Pilot Podcasts. The next time you encounter what seems like a restriction, ask yourself, what might this be protecting?